Welcome back to the lecture. So in this lecture, let's explore about the operational mode of the processor, and this discussion applies to M0, M3 as well as M4. Okay, so if you have any other processor from ARM Cortex such as M7 or any other series, then this discussion should apply to those processors also, but I'm restricting my discussion majorly to M3 as well as M4 processor. Okay, so if you have any other processor, then please check the documentation after this lecture. Okay, so the processor actually gives two operational modes. Okay, so one is called thread mode and another one is called handler mode. So all your application code will execute under thread mode of the processor. Okay, so this is also called as user mode. You can call this mode as user mode also. Okay, so your application code will execute under thread mode of the processor. Okay, all the exception handlers, or you can also call it as interrupt handlers, will run under the handler mode of the processor. Okay, so that means whenever your processor hits with any system exceptions or any interrupts which comes from any peripherals, then the processor will immediately changes its mode to the handler mode, and the interrupt service routine associated with that exception or interrupt will be executed under the handler mode. Okay, so all the exception handlers or interrupt handlers will run under the handler mode of the processor. Okay, so that means physically the core of the processor will give you two modes. Okay, one is thread mode and another one is handler mode. All right, so now this is point number one, this is point number two. So now the point number three is processor always starts with thread mode. Okay, so that means processor by default starts with thread mode. Okay, and whenever the core meets with the system exception or any external interrupts, then the core will change its mode to handler mode in order to service the interrupt service routine associated with that system exception or the interrupt. So whenever the core meets with the system exception or any external interrupts, then the core will change its mode to handler mode in order to service the ISR associated with that system exception or the interrupt. Great, so now we will see all these things practically by running some code onto our microcontroller.